Good afternoon. Welcome to this press conference after the ESM Board of Governors meeting that just concluded. I will be very brief and introduce the speakers. So first will be Mario Centeno, who is the chairperson of the Board of Governors, who will debrief you on today's meeting. Subsequently, ESM Managing Director Klaus Regling will speak, and after that, the independent evaluator Joaquin Almunia will present the findings of his report that he presented to the Board of Governors just now. I would also like to remind you that there is going to be a Eurogroup meeting after this press conference, and that is followed by a press conference, as always, after the Eurogroup. So questions relating to the Eurogroup president, Mr. Centeno, will answer them after the Eurogroup meeting, but anything related to the ESM, obviously, he and the other participants are very happy to answer now. So without further ado, I hand over to you, Mario Centeno. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Wolfgang. We just finished our 8th ESM annual meeting. The ministers reviewed the 2019 activities of the ESM, approving the annual report, and discussed the independent evaluation of the Greek programs authored by Joaquin Almunia. While we focused on past events today, the ESM is very much active in helping us to respond to the economic crisis triggered by the COVID-19 outbreak and the ensuing lockdowns. With the recently created pandemic crisis support, the ESM has demonstrated once again that it provides a critical firewall for shielding our common currency from shocks. Let me say a few words on the evaluation of Greek financial assistance programs. I am very happy with the work done by Joaquin. This is a policy-loaded and balanced report, which I encourage you all to read. At the end of the day, the financial assistance programs have kept Greece in the euro area. This is by no means a small achievement, but the length and the multiple costs of the adjustment, the financial, economic, and social adjustment, demands an explanation. The Greek crisis has shaken our currency. It seriously tested the integrity of the euro area and our capacity to act decisively and effectively. We, ministers and institutions, have a particular interest in drawing lessons. This is an experience none of us can afford to repeat. The board takes all findings and recommendations by Joaquin Almunia seriously and have agreed follow-up actions. This report will inform further discussions, formal and informal, amongst stakeholders. As today was my last ESM Board of Governors, let me take the opportunity to express my deep gratitude to the ESM Managing Director and all ESM staff for their work to help in protecting the euro. In my role as a chairman over the past 2.5 years, we have taken some key decisions together. You will all recall the soft landing to the Greek program, which put an end to the sovereign debt crisis in Europe. The agreement in principle on the ESM treaty reform and the backstop to the Single Resolution Fund. Most recently, the pandemic crisis support instrument was also a landmark in this action. A lot of changes and improvements to our single currency, all through the ESM. It goes to show that this institution has been and will continue to be a powerful instrument to deepen the euro area. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I hand over to ESM Managing Director Klaus Regling.
Yes, thank you to everybody. Let me start by thanking the chairperson of the ESM Board of Governors, Mario Centeno. As he just mentioned, this was the last time he chaired a Board of Governors meeting of the ESM. But during the last 2.5 years, A lot has been achieved. This was an eventful period, and he mentions the main achievements that are very relevant for the ESM and will continue to be relevant, like the end of the Greek program, the political agreement on amending the ESM treaty, and the creation of the pandemic crisis support. So I want to thank Mario Centeno for his hard work and want to express my personal appreciation. The chairman focused his remarks on the report that Joaquin Almunia, our independent evaluator, presented today on the Greek programs. The report, titled Lessons from Financial Assistance to Greece, here it is substantive. When you have the book in your hands, you can feel that it's substantive, but it's also the content that is substantive. And I think it will become required reading for anyone interested in this issue. For me, the report's main takeaway is the following. On the one hand, the programs kept Greece in the euro area and restored financial stability in Greece. That was essential, of course. But at the same time, the report points to a number of things that could have done better. And that's exactly where we can learn important lessons for our future work. The report concludes with 5 concrete recommendations that Mr. Almunia will explain to you in a moment. And our Board of Governors adopted a statement on the report, and that will guide the ESM management when we come up with concrete proposals and conclusions to draw from the report, and we will discuss that in the future with our governing bodies. The Board of Governors also approved today the ESM annual report. This is it. The report reflects important milestones, such as the agreement on the reform of the ESM treaty that I just mentioned. Once ratified, the ESM will provide the backstop to the Single Resolution Fund. This would be and will be an important step towards completing banking union, and it will strengthen the euro area. In addition, the ESM will get a greater role in future programs. The annual report looks at our 5 former program countries, Greece, Portugal, Ireland, Spain, and Cyprus. Together, we disbursed almost 300 billion euro in loans to these 5 countries, a bit more than 2/3 of that to Greece alone. That makes the ESM the largest creditor in all of them, and by a very large margin in Greece. Our loans come at very low cost and with very long maturities. And as a result, all 5 borrowing countries save large amounts of money in their budgets every year. Our annual report shows that Greece saved 14.1 billion euro in its budget in 2019 alone. That is equivalent to 7.5% of Greek GDP. The numbers in the past years and in the coming years have been and will be similarly high. The Greek government can use this money for other purposes. This is an impressive show of solidarity in the euro area, as this gives a lot of budgetary breathing space to Greece. Solidarity is also at play with the ESM's pandemic crisis support. This credit line is available now to all euro area members to finance costs related to the fight against COVID-19. Requesting and using pandemic crisis support would lead to big savings in the budgets of many member states. This money comes basically at 0 interest rate and without any conditionality. It is part of the immediate European response to counter the devastating human and economic effects of the coronavirus crisis. The European Recovery Fund, which is currently discussed by EU members and very much supported by the ESM, will very likely provide financing from next year on only. Finally, the Board of Governors approved the construction of a new ESM office building in the city of Luxembourg. This is in line with recommendations by the European Court of Auditors, according to which owning offices instead of renting them leads to significant savings for institutions over the longer term. The building is expected to be finished by 2028. Now I hand over to Joaquin Almunia, and then we are looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klaus, and thank you very much indeed to Mario Centeno that gave me this mandate more than 1 year ago. I hope his expectations have been fulfilled with the report, and I hope that in his future he will have the same success as he had during these 2.5 years as chairperson of the Eurogroup and of the Board of Governors of the ESM. So let me now go to the evaluation report. Evaluations are always important to draw lessons from the past, to support informed policy decision-making going forward. And in the case of this report, I hope their conclusions and the recommendations will be useful to enhance the ESM's ability to tackle future crises. This evaluation is particularly relevant given the size of the assistance and the dimension of the problems addressed. The extraordinary support provided to Greece, Klaus Regling just mentioned the figure of the programs financed by the EFSF and the ESM, kept the country in the euro area, preserving the integrity of the currency union, and it helped the Greek economy to stabilize its economy, to grow, and to look into the future with hope. So the overall objective of the programs to maintain the integrity of the euro area and to restore financial stability in Greece was attained. At the same time, Greece and its citizens suffered the consequences of 8 years of a very hard economic adjustment, and the findings of this evaluation further increases the concern to get coherent programs with good design, with good governance, with ownership, and I hope that this will also increase the transparency and the accountability of ESM's activities. I would like to highlight the independence of this exercise. I thank you very much to Klaus and to the ESM management, the absolute independence that they respected in my job, and I hope this independence that I enjoyed will be useful to learn from the past and to draw lessons for the future. The analysis of this report was done by a small team at the ESM, which reported directly to me to ensure independence. And the members of this team were not directly involved in the ESM management in Greece. Also, we were aided by a group of very senior external experts that gave value guidance. If you read the report, we detail there the broad input the team gathered to mitigate biases. We did many, many interviews, over 120, half of which in Greece, and we commended background studies. And now very, very quickly, I will go to the recommendations that I added at the end of this report. The first recommendation is that programs must define clear strategic objectives that balance short-term adjustment with long-term sustainable growth. The second says that a good program requires coherent design with conditions focused on what really matters for the achievement of those key objectives of the program. At the same time, we must ensure efforts are fairly distributed to avoid unnecessary social costs of the adjustment. This will increase the resilience of the society and help promote popular support for the adjustments and for the reforms. The third recommendation says that programs must also ensure that the result is sustainable. Exercises to determine that debt is sustainable should be carried out during and after the program. And this will help assess the progress of a program, and this will also help to support interactions after it has ended. Fourth recommendation refers to the need of the institutions, the ESM, the European Commission, and the other institutions, to coordinate their analysis and align as much as possible their assumptions. This will avoid costly delays in making decisions. After the urgency around the current pandemic eases, the ESM could use more of its resources to effectively contribute to the design of future programs. And the fifth and last recommendation asks for a good monitoring needed to make sure the gains for the program are not lost and sustainability is safeguarded once the program has been concluded. This is very important. I see an increasing role for the ESM in explaining the importance of continued reforms beyond the program as a long-term partner. And I would add as a conclusion that in my view, the new ESM treaty that I hope will be adopted and ratified as soon as possible should be the base under which my recommendations should be considered in that light. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joaquin Almunia. We will continue with questions and answers and proceed with the well-established method of hand raising. First is Bjarke Smith-Meyer from Politico, please. Bjarke.
Yeah, hi, Bjarke Smith-Meyer from Politico. Thanks for taking this one question of mine. There was one line in the report that really grabbed my attention, and I'll just read it out for the sake of context. ESM members' national policy preferences at times hampered the institution's ability to effectively design and negotiate policy measures best suited for Greece. I'm just wondering, to what extent can we in the future avoid politics from undermining the sort of independent credibility of the ESM as an institution that bases its work on economic rationale and not political emotion? Thanks.
To whom did you address this question?
I'd love it if everyone said something.
I can start if you like. Huh?
Yeah, I'm greedy, I realize.
Yes. As a former politician, I cannot agree with the need to avoid politics. Designing a program, implementing a program, defining conditions, monitoring the implementation, coordinating the role of the institutions is a highly political challenge for all the political responsibles, both in any of the institutions, the Commission, in the ECB, IMF, and of course the ESM. The question is that if you have a strategic vision in the design of the program with clear strategic objectives, I hope that the political divergences can be solved through agreements that will not delay the adoption of the programs and the implementation of the programs. But I don't consider that politics are incompatible with economic rationale and economic sound analysis. On the opposite, I think good politicians are the necessary condition for good economic policies.
Mario Centeno or Klaus Reging, anything you would like to add?
Nothing to add from my side. I couldn't have said it better.
Okay. The next question is for Mario Centeno. Would you want to add something? You're on mute. Yeah.
Okay, that I fully agree with what Joaquin said, and I think the last decisions taken in the Eurogroup regarding this crisis take all the ingredients that Joaquin mentioned on board. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question will go to Tommaso Galavotti from ADN Kronos, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you for the floor. It's just a question to Director Regling. It's about the pandemic crisis support, because, I mean, in some countries, including Italy, there are a lot of concerns about possible ex post conditionalities. I know that there is a political agreement not to enforce a conditionality at any moment, and you also repeated that there is no conditionality attached to those credit lines. But there is a fundamental problem. The Article 3 of the ESM treaty says, and I quote, that the purpose of the ESM should be to mobilize funding and provide stability support under strict conditionality. So I think that there is a legal problem which is not that easy to overcome in the short term. But don't you think that the treaty should be revised in the medium term just to make the ESM more adapted to the new conditions? Thank you.
Yes, I can answer that. You're right that on the one hand, the ESM treaty requires conditionality for lending. But under these circumstances, our Board of Governors decided that for this particular facility, the conditionality will be the earmarking of the loan from the ESM for financing COVID-19 related expenditures, direct or indirect expenditures. That was the way to satisfy, on the one hand, the requirements of the ESM treaty, and the different legal services of the different institutions have agreed that this is appropriate to do under the circumstances. So I think if there is still fear that there's something else behind our approach, I hope that this is really no longer the case. That was there in the beginning. I think after all the statements that our ministers, our governors, that I have made repeatedly, I think everybody should be aware now that the only condition is to link our loan to expenditures on health and COVID-19. There's nothing else, and all the documents are available on our website, can be checked. So I think this should no longer be a problem.
The next question goes to Athanasios Athanasiou from Capital GR. Please, Athanasios.
Thank you, welcome. Athanasios, Start TV, GR and CNA. Question for the independent evaluator and the managing director. First of all, in the report, in the evaluation, we highlight as the biggest problem the lack of ownership. So practically, what can be done so that we have ownership in a future situation, or what could have been done in the past to avoid this lack of ownership that's now identified? And secondly, on the other report, we see that Greece makes a saving of something like 14 billion euro in 2019. This figure was also high in the previous year and the year before that and every year. And though the Greek authorities do not contest the savings, we hardly ever hear the Greek authorities mentioning this number. And that's quite evident in the policy making even right now, where Greece went out to the markets and borrowed money from the markets with an interest rate of 1.5 something, while the similar ESM line was practically at zero interest rate. How do you comment on that whole situation, and how can we avoid it in the future? Thanks.
Perhaps Joaquin Almunia to start.
Yes, I can start. I can take the first question regarding ownership or the lack of ownership. I think looking backwards, the increase in ownership should have proceeded for a deep analysis and serious analysis in Greece by all the Greek political leaders and economic and social partners what were the origin, the roots of the crisis that triggered the need to ask for a program in 2010? Why Greece had so serious imbalances, bigger than any other member of the euro area? How this can be solved in the future? I think this is a question that I put forward to many of my interlocutors during the interviews in Greece, as I did in the past when I had some responsibilities in the Commission in my contacts with Greek interlocutors. I think this is needed to learn from the past mistakes, as it's needed to learn now for the successes of having reacted positively to the implementation of the programs and reaching a good completion in August 2018 of the third ESM program. And looking forward, my question is how this commitment with reforms, how these sound economic policies will be maintained into the future once there are no troika visits in Greece, once there is no new money that will come from the disbursement of the ESM, once the future will let the Greek political and economic responsibles alone to adopt the right decisions to make sustainable the achievements that Greece has now, thanks to the implementation of the programs.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me add to that indeed I fully agree with Joaquin Almunia. It's necessary at the outset of a crisis to analyze why a country is in a crisis, why market access is lost, and then continuously explain what needs to be done to overcome those problems. I think this is particularly relevant for all institutions involved. We do have a role to play, and one really has to convince public opinion of the right approach. And this was particularly difficult in Greece. We know that in some of the other countries that benefited from EFSF and ESM lending, there was an easy understanding what was at the origin of the crisis, and what had to be done to overcome it. But I take it for the ESM at least, and I'm sure the Commission will also accept this, that it's our role in such a situation to communicate very clearly with all segments of society in a country concerned. On the savings that the Greek budget derives from the huge amount of lending coming from EFSF and ESM, so 14 billion euro last year. I talk about it whenever I am in Greece, which happens several times a year. I have talked about that in interviews on Greek TV, sometimes even with the Greek finance minister coming from different parties standing next to me. So the numbers, as you say, are indeed not disputed. If you think the Greek government should use the number on its own more frequently, probably have to ask them why they are not doing it, because it indeed is significant, and it will continue for a long time because our average maturity is 42 years and our loans will not be fully repaid before the year 2070. So Greece will benefit for a long time, and that is indeed for the benefit of all Greek people.
Oliver Grimm of Die Presse in Austria, please.
Hello, hi. Do you hear me?
Yes, very good.
Okay. I have the following question. It concerns the huge amount of private debt and possibly bad debts that can't be paid back because people, simply don't have the income sources. Already before the crisis, there was reportedly about $500 billion of such bad debt on the books of the banks, and it might even double now because of the corona recession we see. How, in your view, and that's an open question to all three gentlemen, how should this problem be tackled? How serious is it in your view? And would the creation of a bad bank, as reported by Reuters yesterday or the day before, be an avenue to dealing up with this and making sure that bank lending is not frozen because banks are worried about their balance sheets? Thank you.
I think some of that question will be discussed later today in the Eurogroup, so we should not probably cover it now, if Mario agrees. On the Greek situation, I think it's important to recognize that Greek banks made significant progress the last few years in reducing NPLs. So that was good progress. Of course, now with the Corona crisis and the significant decline in GDP in Greece, like in all other countries around the world, also NPLs are likely to go up again. We don't know the numbers, but it's very likely. But we know why. We know the reason for that. But I think it's against this background of very good progress the last few years. It was in line with the agreement that was reached between the SSM and every one of the large Greek banks. So they were doing exactly what had been agreed. And we were very happy with that progress. It's not their fault that now in the near future, there will be some reversal, but we know the reasons for that. But I think on the other question, that's probably for later.
If Joachim Almunia or Mario Centeno have nothing to add, I would give another question to Maria Psara from Euronews, please. Maria.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have two questions, if I may. The first is for all three gentlemen. The Greek crisis shook the European currency. Now we are in the middle of a new crisis because of the coronavirus. Which are the lessons that the Commission, the Member States, and the EU in general could get from the Greek crisis, if there are any? And the second question is for Mr. Almunia. We read your recommendations for the future, but is there anything you could say, you would like to say as a message to the Greek people in regard to all the programs implemented in Greece? Thank you.
Shall I start again? On your first questions, lessons from the Greek crisis. Of course, the entire evaluation report talks about crisis management and lessons from that. And I leave it to Joaquin whether he wants to go back to that. But maybe the one lesson that I would point out and emphasize, and this is a lesson not only from the Greek crisis, but also relevant and can be learned from the other countries that lost market access and had to borrow from the EFSF, Portugal, Ireland, Cyprus, is that every country has to be very careful not to implement economic policies and accept economic developments that are incompatible with being a member of a monetary union. Because that's what happened in Greece the decade or even more than a decade before the crisis erupted in 2009. And it also happened somewhat small extent, but the same problems in the other countries I mentioned. All of them lost competitiveness, therefore had very large current account deficits, very large fiscal deficits. And if that can be avoided, and it should be avoided, and we should learn from history that this is really essential to avoid, to accumulate such macroeconomic imbalances, then there's also no need for rescue programs and for reforms to get out of the problems. So that would be the lesson I would add because it relates to what happened before the crisis broke and therefore is an addition to what you find in the evaluation report.
Would you like to add, Joaquin Almunia?
Yes. Well, on the lessons, I fully agree with Klaus' words. Let me summarize how I see these lessons in 3 points very quickly. The countries needs to have a sound macroeconomic policies, not to forget that external imbalances or fiscal imbalances will trigger unsustainability, and the consequences of unsustainability from the economic point of view or from the fiscal point of view, from the financial point of view, are always negative for the whole majority of the society. Second, this will require as much strong political agreements as possible, not only among those who are part of the government, but also between the government and the main opposition parties, because to adopt reforms and to carry out adjustments requires strong political support. And third point, the reforms, the adjustments need also to take into account the need to keep social cohesion. The efforts should be fairly distributed in a society. This is also a powerful element of sustainability. If the efforts are not fairly distributed, the social unrest will increase and the political ownership will decrease. And this is my message to the citizens of Greece. Please support those political leaders, those social leaders that has these points in their minds, in their agenda, and don't trust the political demagogues that will not talk to you about the consequences of their actions, but only will tell you stories that have nothing to do with the reality.
Mario Centeno, would you want to add something on this question, please?
Yes, and I'll try to connect this with the previous question. We have been working very intensively in the last couple of months to avoid precisely that these crises, which does not have any economic or financial source, it's an exogenous shock, but it is a very severe crisis. We all understand that. And given precisely the lessons we learned from the past, we've been working very intensively to avoid that these crises may morph into a financial or sovereign debt crisis. All instruments put in place, the reaction by the European institutions from the ECB to the European Commission, going through the Eurogroup, all pointed and took decisive actions to avoid these may happen in the future. This is probably the best example that we indeed learned with the mistakes from the past, and we are acting with a very specific purpose to avoid a second wave of these crises, which are always more difficult to handle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mario Centeno, Klaus Regling, and Joaquin Almunia. The Eurogroup meeting is upcoming, so I thank all of the participants for tuning in. And then, as I announced, there will be the Eurogroup press conference following the Eurogroup later in the evening. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.